Okay, hello class. How are you today? Hope everybody's good. Welcome to week 9, if I'm counting correctly. So we're just past midterm. It's easier for me to do the math here at RSU than at another school spent most of my time at, because they had fall break, and then fall break was like half a week, and then Thanksgiving's like half a week. And so that always messed up my math. Here it's nice and square, so we just don't have fall break. We just keep going. However, we get I think a full break for Easter. Is that not right? Does anyone know? We don't? No, you're shaking your head. That really? Oh, that pains.
For Thanksgiving break.
Oh, I said Easter.
For spring.
For spring. Okay, so we get, I don't know why I said Easter. We get a full break for Thanksgiving. Yeah, which is something now to look forward to. You see, if we were coming back from fall break, we wouldn't have as much to look forward to, I guess. So at any rate, so it's easier for me to keep track of the weeks this way, and maybe it is for you and so forth. So week 9, midterm grades, I think, are due for me Wednesday before I go home or something. So again, that'll primarily be based on your first exam, okay? I mean, your homework score is still in progress, and then we haven't gotten to exam 2 yet. I think unit exam 2 is set for October 31st. Something else happening that day. All right, so I think that's a Friday. I'll probably extend it another, if it is, I'll probably extend it another day into the weekend or something. So at any rate, stay tuned for that, but for sure, whatever date is in the syllabus will be included in the exam window. We'll cover, we'll keep moving forward here today. Hopefully we'll get into chapter 10. Chapter 10 for sure will be on that exam. So to me, I think we will be getting into the more interesting stuff in the course. I want to take care of a little detail here in chapter 9 before we wrap it up. But in chapter 10, we'll start looking at market structures, which I think is really interesting. So I was just thinking here before class, let's go to the dot cam just a second. Just a real quick thumbnail sketch of something we've looked at. Let's see here. Okay, so we've talked about these total cost curves. Short run. These are short run total cost curves. So we're in the short run. And now you have the total product curve, but then you have a total cost curve. So remember, the total product curve is S-shaped. It kind of looks like this. So you experience you experience increasing returns to labor for the initial amount of output, and then it begins to fall off. Well, we reflected that, if you'll recall, the total product curve. We reflected the total product curve about the 45-degree line last time, and we got the what we might call the total cost curve here. So what we have is a vertical axis where we measure cost, and on a horizontal axis we measure output. So, I mean, we had reflected this curve, if you recall, where we had output on the vertical axis. And you had cost, in particular, I want to talk about variable cost here, but you had total product of the variable input. Okay, I mean, I don't know if I need to go back and show you that picture. What I'm talking about is again in chapter 9. Here I go though. I want to make sure we're all together. So remember that, like the total product curve, here it is, that S-shaped curve here. Okay, so we reflected that this way so that you have product on the horizontal axis. And then you have quantity of labor, or whatever the variable input is. That's usually the variable input's labor. We had that, the cost of that on the vertical axis. So we would take units of labor and then multiply by the wage rate. And that was just simply rescale this a little bit. So if you're paying your workers $100 a day, so 6 labors would cost you $600. But at any rate, the shape of the total cost curve obtained by reflecting this about 45-degree line basically then is another S-shaped curve, but it initially is concave down and then becomes concave up, see? Where this one's concave up and it's concave down. So initially here because of increasing returns to labor, this curve is concave up, and then because of decreasing returns to labor, it's concave down. Now when we reflect it, we have a curve that's initially concave down, okay? So that's what I did here. So it's initially concave down, and then it's concave up. It's still increasing, okay? But in this region here, initially up to this inflection point, we observe it's increasing at a decreasing rate, okay? Increasing at a decreasing rate. So we call that decreasing marginal cost. So when you have increasing returns to labor, you have decreasing marginal cost. So just real quick, I mean, this is such an important concept, but the idea here is in this region, I've drawn two line segments here. I don't know if you can see these or not. But initially here, for any value of output, okay, we see that for the next value, the next unit of output, the marginal cost, which is the slope of this secant line between consecutive units. So maybe this is 100 and this is 101. It doesn't matter, and I'll put a little jag in there to say it's. But initially here, for this total cost curve, you're experiencing decreasing marginal cost because the total product curve has increasing returns to labor. And so what you see is that the slope of the marginal cost curve, this would be the marginal cost of the 101st unit, basically is less than the average cost of 100 units, okay? Because the average cost, remember, is the slope of this secant that joins the origin. So the rise over the run would be the total cost, which is measured on the vertical axis. We're just looking at the variable input now, okay? Again, if you look at the fixed input, you know, you got rental costs and those things, certain salaries and so forth that are fixed, that just shifts this curve up, but it doesn't change the theory we're looking at. But here the slope of the, I've got this backwards, by the way. I've got this backwards. The slope of the average cost curve is greater than the average cost secant line is greater than the slope of the marginal cost secant. I hope everybody sees that. So what's the deal? If the marginal is less than the average, it pulls the average in its direction, it pulls it down. Okay? So this is what we've been talking about here. In this region right here, and we've seen it with the marginal average relationship, right? So when the marginal is less than the average, it pulls the average down. Conversely, if you're out in this region over here, let me just draw that curve again, just to make sure we understand. There it is. Beyond this inflection point out here, it would be the case that the marginal is greater than the average. Okay, so I don't know, it's not very convincing perhaps. That slope almost looks like, but there's a little bend there. At some point there's a little bend and then it takes off when it hits the wall here. But the idea here is beyond some point, and maybe this is 200 units, and so that the marginal cost of the 201st unit, okay, is greater than the average cost of 200 units. Does that make sense? Because the average cost of 200 units here is the slope of this secant line from these 2 points. And then between adjacent points here, you got the marginal cost. So what's that doing to the average? If the marginal is greater than the average, it pulls the average up. Okay? I think probably by now we all see this. But in this case, the marginal cost was greater than the average cost. So, you know, we've put some numbers in here and we say, well, if there are 200 people in a room, they all have on average $10 in their pocket, and somebody comes in with $11, they pull the average up and so forth. So I hope this makes sense. So what's the result of this? Okay, there is a point at which, right here at the inflection point, where the average and the marginal are equal, okay? And maybe you can see that on either one of these graphs. This one might be the easiest to see. I want to make note of this too. when the average, okay, notice it goes down and then it goes back up. So we've been working with that numerically and so forth. At this point right here, the average is a minimum. Okay, this corresponds to minimum, average, and I've got total cost here. It's really total variable cost, but that, you know, it would be total cost if your fixed cost were zero. So I'm just going to go ahead and call it minimum, average, total cost. Whenever you have minimum, average, total cost, or average variable cost, then you're just brushing the total cost line like this, because it's going to swing back up. And something you should note is that, if I had another, I got another color somewhere, but notice that if I back this way off, I don't know, maybe, you know, I'm using small numbers here, but maybe this is 150 and this is 151. But if at 150,000 and 150,001, whatever, at some point these 2 points are so close together. They're so close together, you can't see a separation. So that this little secant line that joins these 2 points on the curve essentially is a tangent line. Tangent means touch. Secant comes from the Latin secare, which means to cut. So at some point the tangent line becomes the marginal cost. So when we're here, notice I've got this a little darker here. The slope of a tangent line, which represents the marginal cost of this unit, maybe the 150, let's just say the 150.5th unit, okay, 150 and a half units, if you could do a half of a unit. At this point right here, the marginal cost equals the average total cost, okay? We've noted this numerically and elsewhere graphically, but again, at minimum, average, whatever it is, if it's average total cost or average variable cost, when you get to the minimum, then the minimum average equals the marginal. So at the minimum average, we have the following, that the marginal cost equals the average cost, or the margin, whatever, okay? Whatever, if it's a marginal product, you got the same sort of relationship going. All right, so when an average becomes a minimum, you have the marginal equals the average. And so if we were going to look at average total cost, or let's say average variable cost first, because it goes to the origin here. We don't have any fixed cost. Notice it goes down, goes back up. So we sketched this graph last time. We said again that average variable cost has to be a U-shaped curve. And at its minimum, the marginal cost curve has to intersect. Marginal cost is also, if you can look at this graph again, these little secant lines here have slopes that go, notice they go down and then they go back up. So the marginal cost curve is also a U-shaped curve, okay? Marginal cost intersects the average total cost. Now, I've got here average variable cost again because I've really sketched, I could put a V in here, I've sketched the cost curve, it goes to the origin. Now if you slap fixed cost on this, you simply shift this up, okay? So the cost curve now is up here somewhere. You can imagine that for a second. What's the relationship between the average total cost curve and the average variable cost curve? Let's just come down here and think about that a second, just for a second. I don't know, I'm kind of doing a little chalk talk here this morning, but it's worthy of our contemplation, I really think. Here again is the average variable cost. Okay, average total cost is like that, but you remember average total cost, ATC, is average variable cost plus average fixed cost. And average fixed cost is, though positive, it kind of decreases over time. So the average fixed cost curve, well, I'm sorry, I wrote average here. This is total variable cost. We'll put the average up here in a second. This is true, okay? We'll get here, but I've sketched here total variable cost. So if you sketch the total cost, which includes the fixed cost, you get another curve that's parallel to this. You just shift this up by the fixed cost. This is total fixed cost. Okay, so I want to note something here. The average variable cost achieves a minimum kind of about here. Okay. The average total cost achieves a minimum at about here. You see that? Again, this is total variable cost here, and this is total fixed cost here. And so what we see is that in both cases, the marginal is going to equal the average, but that's going to occur at a higher value of output, Q, here than here. So as to say, then the average total cost curve is upward sloping as well, kind of U-shaped, but it has a minimum coincident with the marginal at a higher value of Q. So this value of Q is kind of like for this value. And this value of Q, I'm going to cheat just a little bit, is kind of for this one. Okay? There we go. So the average total cost curve, which is this one right here, ATC, can't write today, but equals the average variable cost curve plus the average fixed cost, which we noted the average fixed cost. Remember that one tapers off to 0 for larger quantities of Q. So these two curves get closer and closer together because this thing goes to 0, though it's positive always. So you have two U-shaped curves. Through the minimum of each, we'll pass this other U-shaped curve called the marginal cost curve. So that's an important thing. And we are going to come back and use this today, okay, in Chapter 10. Very important, okay? So is there any questions on that? Does that make sense, kind of what's going on there? There's a couple concepts here, graphical concepts your book really doesn't get into, but, you know, I thought it was important, especially looking at these two curves together and seeing that this minimum average cost occurs at a higher quantity here on the total cost curve than the minimum average variable cost does. This is greater than this. Okay, so hang on to this. We're going to come back to it, okay? I promise you this is a very important diagram. Okay, so last time, okay? I know I've spent more time on that than I probably should have, but it's really fundamental. So last time we were looking at economies of scale. We want to wrap up that discussion just a little bit today. We had this diagram from your text here. And well, this is the long run average total cost curve. It's an envelope curve, okay, in that it envelops the short run average total cost curve for various plant sizes. So we had a discussion of this. This curve, by the way, does not connect the minimum points of the average short-run average total cost curve. This does not pass through the minimum points. I mean, if you really zoomed in here, you would see perhaps for this one right here, the minimum is actually here, okay? And that becomes a critical thing in microeconomic theory you look at later. But what this long-run curve is a curve that envelops, or it kind of becomes tangent to all of these short-run average total cost curves for various plant sizes. Okay, here we go. Wrote it right here. So each one of these is a short-run average total cost curve. So there's a point at which you can minimize average total cost for plant size. So there's a plant size, and for each industry, okay, this is the idea. This is industry specific. For each industry, there's an optimal plant size that will allow you to produce at lowest average total cost. Now, so extreme examples would be, say, big box retail, okay? Now, you may think you can go home and start competing with Walmart, but it's doubtful that even in your lifetime, I hate to say it, but you'll gather enough capital to compete with Walmart. It's just not going to happen. It's huge. It's huge. So what you see is that Walmart's here, but the output, that is which is a proxy here for, you know, the size of a plant and so forth. They have these huge distribution centers and so forth. Go over to Bartlesville, you'll see one. But it's way out there. You got to be big. You got to be big to reach the minimum, what's called minimum efficient scale, which is the size of plant, output against the proxy for that. MES is the optimal size plant that will drive those average costs down. So for Walmart, big box retail, for power generation, for public utilities, for automobile manufacturing, for commercial aircraft manufacturing, for telecom, for all these industries, you have a very large minimum efficient scale. You're not going to just come up and compete with Sprint overnight, okay? Because it's lots of infrastructure required. So you think about certain industries that are typified by huge investments and fixed cost before they're even up and running. Really, if you wanted to like enter that industry today, you got to really invest in a lot of stuff. I do know Walmart started out as a one-horse thing way back there, but not today. You know, if you're going to go head-to-head with Walmart, you're just not going to get there. You might have a little power generating plant in your backyard, a little whirly-burly thing, or, you know, a solar panel, and you sell electricity to the grid. You could do that, you know that? But you're operating on a cost curve way up here. You're not, if it's only because of subsidies and so forth that you're able to really compete, but purely in a pure economic sense, you couldn't compete if the demander out there is always seeking the best deal. You're not going to sell your electricity because you can't compete. You can't produce it at as cheap or low of a dollar price per kilowatt hour as a big coal burning plant. So the point is, some industries have huge MESs, minimum efficient scales, or that is to say large economies of scale. Others, you know, screen printing I mentioned last time is one of those where about anybody can get into and so forth. In fact, we'll be looking at that more later when we talk about perfect competition. But some firms have low barriers to entry and they don't involve much capital to start up with and so forth. So their MES is small. So when you have a huge MES, minimum efficient scale, what ultimately happens, if it's very huge, then the size plant approaches the size of the market. So we mentioned last time, why are there only 2 major commercial aircraft manufacturers in the world? Because the world's not big enough to support 3, okay? The world's big enough kind of to support 2. So there's 2 firms, Airbus and Boeing, that can take advantage of economies of scale in that industry. Bigger means cheaper. That's what economies of scale mean. Bigger means lower average total cost. So you get big, big, big. The bigger Walmart is, the cheaper they can put a unit of good, whatever it is, on that store shelf. So it turns out, as you might suspect, that when you have a very large minimum efficient scale, it may be that 1 or 2 firms comes to dominate the industry, okay? In fact, that's kind of what you have, you know, aircraft manufacturing. Again, keep going back to this, but you have a duopoly. You have 2 firms, pretty much. There are others. There's Lockheed Martin and Beechcraft and so forth. But there's 2 firms that have taken over the market. So we talk about natural monopolies. Natural monopolies is what's going to eventuate when you have very large economies of scale. All right, so your book has this discussion. There's sometimes when you have kind of short economies of scale, but then constant returns to scale, and then diseconomies of scale. This can happen too. This kind of describes certain certain industries like the apparel industry, food processing, furniture making, okay? Lots of different size furniture plants. Banking, another one. You may bank at Bank First, but then you may also go to Bank of America, two banks that are vastly different sizes. So you have there in that banking industry a very large area here where the economies of scale pretty much constant, okay? And so you have constant returns to scale there. Small appliance manufacturing is another one, and so forth. But when you have a small minimum efficient scale, then expect there to be many firms populating the industry. If you have a large minimum efficient scale, expect there to be few, okay? All right, so I wanted to mention that. Any questions on that? All right, so the minimum efficient scale has a lot to do with the structure of the industry. We're going to talk about market structure, industry structure here in a little bit. And one we'll get to is monopoly, okay? So often with a monopoly you have, not always, okay, but you have very significant economies of scale. You can have a monopoly for other reasons because you got the patent on making whatever. I got the monopoly. And maybe you're just a one-horse outfit. If you got a patent or you got an exclusive license to make something, then you have a monopoly in that market. But it's not a natural monopoly. A natural monopoly is one that's the outcome of very significant economies of scale. So at any rate, I think you can get the rest of this. In certain industries too, you realize when I talk about aircraft manufacturing, the world is Boeing's oyster, so to speak. They produce aircraft for the whole world. And so very significant economies of scale there in that their market's big and they can expand to fill the market. Now, there are other kind of natural monopolies that expand to fill their market, but their market's not so big. Their market may be limited by geographical size. If you're a concrete maker, ready mix, okay? So you may be the only one around because you've invested in a lot of equipment and so forth, and so you put your rivals out of business. That's really kind of what a natural monopoly is, all right? However, if you're in Muskogee, Oklahoma, my hometown, and you're a ready mix or you make cement, you're not going to be pouring concrete in western Oklahoma. It's just not going to happen. They're going to be chipping it out of your trucks by the time you get there. So the point is, in a finite geographical area, something much less than the whole world, in a finite geographical area, you may have a natural monopoly as well, but it may not really extend that far. Over in another county, there may be another natural monopoly in the same industry, okay? Again, though, here's a critical thing. Natural monopolies result from economies of scale. Economies of scale result from significant fixed cost investment, okay? Significant fixed cost investment. Because if you want to produce whatever, aircraft, automobiles, petroleum, whatever it is, you got to make a big investment before you can sell that first unit. And you want to spread that cost over many units. You have to spread that fixed cost over many units. So that's how you're driving that average total cost down, is you're spreading the fixed cost. So the only way that's going to happen is if there are significant fixed costs that characterize your industry. Screen printing doesn't have much. I keep going back to that, but maybe grocery stores as well. Every town's got a couple grocery stores or so. I don't know what it is, but in my town, there's a lot of restaurants. You just restaurant everywhere. Restaurant. Well, there's a bunch. What's going on here? Okay, I know there's some fixed investment you incur when you set up a restaurant, but not that big, okay? So a lot of people can get into that. The barrier to entry is fairly small. And so it's not like I'm going to go over here to get a steak instead of over here because they're so much cheaper. I mean, there's a lot of other things that weigh into that, right? Quality and so forth. But for the most part, if you got two restaurants in the same town, they're producing a burger or steak or whatever, it's kind of the same. it kind of costs them the same. Okay, it's not like one had to invest in robotics, okay, to make a hamburger. So, at any rate, you see, as you kind of think about it, what is it that drives those average total cost curves down in certain industries so that only a few can compete? Well, it's because those industries have very significant fixed cost investments. Another factor in our modern world that comes into play in creating natural monopolies are something called network effects. Okay? Network effects. Network effects is a phenomenon where the value of a good or service, the value increases as more people use it. Okay, so we're not talking about the cost of production so much, however it's related to it. But I just give you a silly example. Once in a while I'll be looking at my cell phone and I think, man, if I could have had this thing in high school, I'd have been the envy of the whole school. That's how old I am, because there were no cell phones when I was in high school. But would I have been? No, because no one else had a cell phone, right? What good is a cell phone if you can't pick it up and talk to some? Or if there's just a few other people. And so I remember later in my adulthood, a few people had cell phones, big bulky things. Who wants one of those? You know, oh, that might be nice once in a while. It was only when the cell phone went mainstream and so you could talk to lots of other people that the value of a cell phone really was significant. And so there you may have monopolies, kind of in a way, kind of a natural monopoly that may result because of network effects or the positive network externalities that kind of typify the demand side of that particular market. Social media platforms is another one, right? There's a discussion about this in your book, just a little bit in chapter 9. I guess Facebook was a good thing to have 30 years ago, if it existed. Maybe it kind of came around about then. But, you know, there was MySpace and Facebook. Y'all don't remember that, but it's like, which one's going to win here? Okay, so Facebook won. Instagram won, right? But it's network effects were at play there. As more people went to Facebook, the stock price went up. It became more valuable to be on Facebook and so forth. And so this leads to kind of a natural monopoly situation. We see this in social media. Way back there when this started, and I remember my dad, who's passed away years ago, but he kind of knew a lot of what was going on, especially for his generation. He said, watch, next thing that's going to take off is social media. And I go, what's that? I said, what's that? Social media, that's the next big thing. Well, sure enough, he was right, because he said that in about 1990. He said that. But the industry has evolved in that there's become kind of a monopoly, if you will. I mean, I know there's other social, and now, you know, it's kind of taken a turn, you know. Maybe you don't want to be on Facebook, but you want to be on some sort of social media thing. But you got to admit, Facebook is a big player in that industry. And so with network effects, one firm can kind of take over the market. So we see that in social media. We see that in telecom as well. You see mergers and so forth resulting because bigger means cheaper and because of network effects. So you got Sprint and Verizon, what have you. You got these mergers happening, and that makes for better compatibility across those services, and those services can be delivered at a lower average total cost. So all these are things that you probably have an intuitive feel for. Just want to mention that these are important when we look at monopoly. I want to look at a problem or two before we go to chapter 10. Let's look at problem, chapter 9, problem. First off, problem 1. Let's look at problem 1. I think we got time for that. And this is, I'll get my stuff together here. On page 195 of your text. So let's go to page 195 and see if we can, this one's pretty straightforward, but I just want to make sure we understand the different profits your book talks about. I guess I need to take this out of here. Sorry about this. Okay, so it talks about Gomez. So I'm going to naturally think of that old TV show. I don't watch TV, but I remember Gomez. What was that? Addams Family? Okay, I guess it's going to clear up. I hope so. Okay, there we go. It's just a little slow. It's a Tuesday morning. We're not really warmed up for the week. Gomez runs small pottery farm. She hires one helper, $12,000 a year, pays annual rent of $5,000 for her shop, spends $20,000 per year on materials. She has $40,000 of her own funds invested in equipment like pottery wheels, kilns, and so forth that could earn her $4,000 a year if alternatively invested. She has offered $15,000 per year to work as a potter for a competitor. She estimates her entrepreneurial talents are worth $3,000 a year. Her total revenue from pottery sales is $72,000. So calculate the accounting profit and the economic profit for Gomez, okay, for her pottery firm. And so the thing you want to note here is there's like three types of information given here. There's explicit cost and there's implicit cost given. And then they'll give you a revenue figure. And from that, they want us to calculate accounting profit and economic profit. So I want to explore this just a little bit. There's some interesting concepts here. So, okay, maybe we can read this still right about here, perhaps. Okay, so let's list first off in problem one the explicit costs. The things, she goes into this new enterprise, she's going to have to write a check for some things, okay? Or reach into her wallet or purse for something. So what kinds of things?
Helper salary.
Okay, that's right. Her helper, exactly right. Thank you. Her helper salary is going to cost her $12,000. Wow. I mean, you got to pay for workers, right? There's a check. Anything else?
Rent.
All right, rent. Exactly right. You got rent. It's $5,000. Anything else? Materials. Okay, thank you very much. Materials is $20,000. So these are her explicit costs, the things she's going to have to write checks for. All right, so this is total explicit cost is $37,000. So we're going to use that in a minute to compute her accounting profit. Additionally, we'll need implicit cost to determine her economic profit, okay? So what's some implicit costs here? Things that are cost, but she doesn't really write checks for.
$40,000 for the investment.
Okay, there is the $4,000 foregone. It talks about she could earn $4,000 per year if she invested this somewhere else. So here's the deal. You got to be careful here, but she's got $40,000, and it's not like that's going to dissipate this year. She's going to have it at the end of the year. Regardless of what she does, I mean, she's going to keep that $40,000. The thing is, the $40,000 could do something for her during the course of the year. It could earn her 10%. So she's going to give that up to help fund this new enterprise. So she gives up the interest income she could bring home, which would be $4,000. So she's got this nest egg she's not going to touch, but she could rake off income from it every year, $4,000. Okay, that's what she's giving up. She could be taking this home, taking vacations or what have you, but alas, she's plowing it into this new business. What's another thing she's given up? She's given up, talks about she's been offered $15,000 a year to work as a potter for a competitor. So she's got a choice to make. Does she work for the competitor or does she have her own business? So if she has her own business, she can't work for the competitor. So there's a foregone salary. Does that make sense? Foregone salary here of $15,000. Anything else that she gives up here? Says...
What her talents be?
Yeah, exactly. Her entrepreneurial talents are worth $3,000 a year. So here's the deal. If she goes into this new enterprise here, it's like she's foregoing this entrepreneurial income she could earn elsewhere, okay? Foregone entrepreneurial, that's a long word, income, okay, of $3,000, okay? So, I mean, you know, that would give her something additional if she were using her time in a way other than in this new enterprise. That's the idea. So there's total implicit cost here. If you add these up, you get total implicit cost is $22,000. Okay. So there's explicit costs. So if you think of the $22,000 here a second, this is what she could take home if she took employment with a competitor. Okay, let's think about it in this way. Think in these terms. Okay, this is her take home. This would be her take home if she worked for a competitor. For the competitor and didn't try to do her own business. So like this foregone entrepreneurial income, she might work for the competitor and she'd get this salary, but then she on the side could have her own little side hustle, and that's what that would bring in. And then of course she'd be bringing this in from her bank account or wherever her investment is, okay? All right, but now, alas, all of these things now are being plowed into this new enterprise, and that's the thing to keep in mind. Okay, so we have two different types of costs. Also here we want to recognize that there's revenue at work in this new enterprise. Revenue in new enterprise. And how much is that? Total annual revenue from pottery sales is $72,000. Y'all see that? So $72,000. Okay. So first thing I want us to note is that there is multitasking here, all these different things. And then it's so far back there I can't see it. You have accounting profit. Accounting profit is revenue minus explicit cost. And so what is that? That's the $72,000 minus $37,000. And what's that going to be? $35,000. So this is her accounting profit. A lot of people look at that as their profit, okay? Oh, you know, your revenue exceeded what you had to write checks for by $35,000. Can you live on that? Whatever, you might live on that. But here's the deal. She gave up a lot of other things to go in this enterprise. So the economist says, wait a minute, just because that looks like a nice number, it doesn't tell us whether she's better off in her own business than she would be working for the competitor. And that's what we really care about as economists. So economists calculate economic profit. So this is revenue minus explicit cost minus implicit. I'm just going to say that here. 72,000 minus 37,000. And then the implicit cost is 22,000. Oh, well, that's going to shave it on down, right? 13,000. This is her economic profit. So the question is, what's the significance of that number? Well, the significance is this, is basically saying she's doing better off than she would in the alternative, her best alternative, which is to work for the competitor. She's doing better off by this amount. Now, when you say, hey, my profit last year was $13,000, most of us are not impressed with that. We might say, how can you live on $13,000? If you tell them it's $35,000, oh, okay, maybe. $13,000 doesn't seem to impress anyone. However, it should. It really should. In fact, if this number is just $100, it's actually impressive. Anytime the economic profit's greater than zero, it means she's doing better than she would in her next best option. okay, and her next best option. She's doing this much better. All right, so let's think about Gomez, someone with Gomez's talent. You know, if basically she would be doing the same, Gomez would be indifferent between working for the competitor, and we're speaking purely in economic terms here. There's a satisfaction that goes with having your own business, I know. So, but she would be indifferent between the options if the economic profit were equal to 0. I want to think about that a second. If her economic profit is 0, then that means her accounting profit would be what? Can you tell? If her economic profit is 0, okay, first off, she's not doing better, she's not doing worse. Okay? But her accounting profit would have to be $22,000. In this new enterprise, if her economic profit's 0, then her accounting profit, which is revenue minus explicit cost, would have to just barely cover the implicit cost. So her accounting profit would be, $22,000. Okay? So what we're seeing here is an individual who, if she were to work for the competitor, would kind of expect to earn $22,000 a year. Okay? And if she shrugs her shoulders, I don't care whether I go in business or not, because I'm not going to make that much. But if her accounting profit's $22,000, she would just barely. So if she were making a paycheck, $22,000 a year, okay, then she is indifferent between doing that and entering this other industry if her economic profit were 0. Now, the only way her economic profit would be 0 here, given these costs that we've traced out, is if the revenue were considerably different. If the revenue instead of $72,000 were like $59,000. So this would happen, this would occur if our business revenue were $59,000. Okay? So what's going on? There's some moving parts here. But if you take the revenue minus explicit cost minus implicit cost, and her revenue are $59,000, and her explicit cost, as we noted, is $37,000, then she's taking home, right there, kind of think of it that way. In a previous job, she would be taking home $22,000 at this point because she wouldn't have any explicit costs. Now she has explicit costs, so her revenue needs to be higher. She needs to be able to pay herself more, okay? Because she's got more things coming out of her pocket. But also, once she covers those implicit costs, her economic profit is 0. Okay? So we call a 0 economic profit a normal profit. There's another term for it, normal profit. If the economic profit is 0, then the accounting profit for the entrepreneur is just large enough, so that at the end of the day, they're bringing home the same amount of money. Okay? So the revenue would have to be pretty big. Doesn't have to be $72,000, because that's even better. But if it's at least $59,000, then she's going to begin to look at going into business for herself. So when the economic profit's 0, she begins to break even, if you will, from her previous opportunity. If the revenue's $60,000, the economic profit would be $1,000, right? Guess what? She's going to quit her job if she just makes a purely economic decision. She's going to quit, or she's not going to go to work for the competitor. Keep thinking of that post office situation we looked at, right? If she's not going to work for the competitor, she's going to start her own business. So a normal profit for her corresponds to a 0 economic profit. So you hear those terms used on occasion, okay? Let's look at one more here. Look at problem 3, okay? Is there any questions on this before we go? All right. So problem 3. Let's see if we can go to this. Okay. Let's explore how rising costs helped to kill off most printed newspapers after the internet became available in the mid-1990s. Imagine you are a newspaper publisher in the year 2004. You're in the middle of a one-year factory rental contract that requires you to pay $500,000 per month, and that you have contractual salary obligations of $1 million per month that you can't get out of. You also have a marginal printing cost of 25 cents per paper, as well as a marginal delivery cost of 10 cents per paper. So you realize that marginal printing cost, that's the paper and the ink and all that. If sales fall by 20% from 1 million to 800,000 per month, what happens to the average fixed cost per newspaper, the marginal cost per newspaper, and the minimum amount you must charge to break even? All right, so what do you think, class? If sales fall off, what's going to happen to the average fixed cost? Remember, average fixed cost divided by quantity. So you got to spread that fixed cost over fewer newspapers, right? So the average fixed cost has got to go up. All right, so we have here, we could call it, someday we'll have a screen up here, and I'll just have to look here. Okay, so you have an initial state. Let's just call this an initial state. Okay, so with the initial state here, you have a total fixed cost equal to, now they mentioned here, $500,000 a month and $1 million a month. Those are kind of like contractual relationships you can't get out of, salaries and so forth. So total fixed cost is $1 million plus $500,000, which is a nice, cool $1.5 million, $1,500,000 a year, a month. You got to be careful using. Sometimes the problem they'll change the time frame up for you, but we're working in months here. And you know, in the initial state, we're selling quantity here per month is 1 million newspapers. Okay, just right on the dot, right? 1 million papers. So the average total cost then, of course, is 1,500,000 over 1 million. So that's straightforward enough, I think. So I think this is $1.50 per paper. Easy enough. Now, of course, I think we see that they say that sales are going to drop off, and this is the final state. Let's just call it final state. After the sales drops off, because print's no longer in vogue, okay? People don't want print anymore, they're going online. Average total cost now is spreading that total fixed cost over fewer newspapers. Okay, so you're going to divide by 800,000 instead of 1 million. So this is 1.875. If you want dollars per paper, oh, what happened here? We went from $1.50 to $1.87. Okay, so it just went up. So that's not good. We don't like to see that in management. All right, so that's the first thing. Okay, just kind of see that if the denominator decreases here, fewer papers, the fraction's got to go up. What about the marginal cost per paper? Ask about that. What do you think, class? What's the marginal cost per paper? Okay, and does that change? It doesn't change, does it? So the marginal cost is the same. So first off, the marginal cost, yes, the marginal. Not margin, but marginal. Margin is not good for you. Okay, it's axle grease. Don't eat the stuff. Okay, marginal cost. Okay, per paper is going to be unchanged. And what is it? It's a 25 and 10 cents. We see here, 10 cents. So, 35 cents a paper, and that's unchanged. Unchanged. Okay. All right. That. Whoops. You can't see what I'm writing, can you? It's too many moving parts up here. All right, for this finite brain of mine. Okay, so what else are they going to ask? I think they asked something about break even. What is the minimum amount you must charge to break even? So there's a minimum amount that you're going to charge to break even initially and then afterwards. Okay, in other words, the price of the paper's got to go up. If you're going to stay in business, you're going to have to charge more because you're selling fewer papers. I think that's pretty intuitive. So let's figure out, what do we have to charge for? Let's first find the initial break even. Initial break even. Initial break even. Okay, so I put a question mark there. So remember, you got to cover those, well, you got to cover your cost, all right? So you're going to, when we say initially, you're going to sell 1 million papers. So we got to find your revenue, right? Because when you find the price, you'll find the revenue. The revenue is 1 million times the price. So I'm just going to write 1 million P, and it's really P we're looking for. We want to find the value of P here that'll create a revenue that'll cover all of your cost. And so what are your costs? Well, you got fixed cost. And what else? I can't spell fixed plus variable. Total fixed cost plus variable cost. So your fixed cost, as I recall, was 1,500,000, right? Because you have the salaries and the rental or something like that. So you got 1,500,000. What's your variable cost? Well, it's that marginal cost we computed just a moment ago. 0.35 times the number of papers. Okay, so this is 1 million. Does that make sense? So initially you're selling 1 million papers. So your variable cost here is 350,000. Your fixed cost is here. This is 350,000 for variable cost. Gives you total cost of $1,850,000. So you got to cover that out of your revenue to break even. So here's your revenue here. So the idea is you break even when the revenue minus the cost is equal to 0. Okay, isn't that right? That's when you break even. So, so this is going to be 1 million P. That's the revenue. Minus your cost is 1,850,000 equals 0. So we can find out what P is here by dividing. And what's that got to be, class? Can you tell? $1.85, $1.85. They got to sell those newspapers at $1.85 to break even. All right. Now, of course, they lose business, so they're going to sell 800,000 papers. So this is a final, to find the final break even. Let's just do it real quick. Final break even. If you can read my slop there, final break even for 800,000 papers would be, well, you first find the cost. This is the fixed, but notice the variable cost changes, right? It's 35 cents for 800,000 papers. Okay, hope that makes sense. So if you add this up, multiply, you get $1,780,000. And that's got to be covered by 800,000 papers. So now the price is $1,780,000 total cost spread over 800,000 papers. Oops. So this is like 2.225 or 275. 275, okay. I don't know which, I don't know if that's a 2, somebody can, I'll put a question mark. At any rate, it rounds to $2.23 per paper. $2.23 per paper. So she was, or this isn't Gomez anymore, I don't know who this was, but had to charge $1.85 before the business fell off to stay in business, essentially to have zero profits. Anything above that's good. Now, again, we're talking economic profits here. Anytime when we talk about costs and so forth, these wrapped in these figures are explicit costs as well as implicit, because we're thinking like economists. And so going forward, when we say profit, it means economic profit, okay? So, but at any rate, notice the price to attain a zero profit here has to go up, of course, because we're selling fewer papers. So I hope that makes sense, okay? All right, enough of chapter 9, okay? Hope so. We've spent 3 sessions on 9. Normally I would spend only 2. On most of these chapters, but I want to introduce chapter 10 here today. So today we're going to go to perfect competition. And I want to show you, at least in the time we have here, some pictures out of your book. If nothing else, I want to show some pictures out of your book. Don't know why I don't have all of them, the pictures here, but that's okay. All right, so I talk to myself a lot. Let's see here. So in chapter 10, we're going to talk about our first market structure, or way an industry is organized. There's kind of a spectrum here, and sometimes, nothing is, you might look at an industry and says, well, where did I do with this? It's kind of hard to decide. There's some gray sometimes in demarking these 4 areas, these 4 market structures that we're going to look at here. But nevertheless, these are kind of guideposts for us. There's 4 what we call market structures here. These are listed on page 197 of your text. So if we go here just a second, I want to show you what to focus on in this chapter. So they talk about pure competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and pure monopoly. Okay, I guess it'll, radar, is it working back there? Thank you. Okay, great. Okay. Sometimes this thing's a little, have to hit it twice or something, I don't know. All right, these are called your 4 market models. Now, forgive me if I use a little different terminology, because I usually hear market structures. It's usually what you hear. Different ways of organizing, or the way an industry might be organized. There's pure competition at one end, or perfect competition. It's another term you hear a lot. Perfect competition and at one end, and you got monopoly at the other. And then you got a blend between, okay? Now, I think we all have a notion, first off, of what a monopoly is. I remember living, grew up in the country, went to town, a little town out in the middle of nowhere, had one grocery store. The prices were high, because they were the only game in town. You had to drive. If you wanted a better deal, you had to drive to the big town of Muskogee. But I won't identify this community, but in my youth there was one grocery store, and I was just a little lad, but I remember my mother kind of complaining about the prices. Is it worth driving to Muskogee? Well, the deal is you had a monopoly. You had one unique grocery store. There were no real substitutes and so forth. So you get these attributes of monopoly over here on the right. We already have a notion of what that is. We could sit here and name many monopolies, I'm sure. We'll be looking at that later. We're going to start here and work our way across this chart. Chapter 10 deals with pure competition. What is pure competition? What's that about? Well, first off, there's a very large number of firms or suppliers, okay? Very large number. Okay, let me just give you an example. Wheat farming, okay? Wheat farmers all over the world, okay? All over the world. They produce pretty much a standardized product, okay? Here's a nice thing too, or a distinctive thing about perfect competition. No supplier can claim that their product is unique or superior. I mean, within broad categories, wheat's wheat, corn's corn, right? And so, when nobody is able here to convince others that their brand really is superior. Okay, so that's another thing. Control over price. Here's a key thing here. An individual supplier, one wheat farmer, I use that example a lot. No matter how large they are, there's some big wheat farmers in Nebraska, okay, that own hundreds of thousands of acres. But guess what? None of them are big enough to influence the price of wheat on the market. They have to take they're price takers. They're called price takers. So the price is determined by all the wheat farmers. There's not one, no one wheat farmer has, and here's a key term. You'll hear this a lot. No wheat farmer has market power. Okay? They do not have the ability to raise their price. Oh, my wheat's special. I think instead of $2.25 a bushel, I'll charge $2.30. Guess what? They're not going to sell their wheat. They don't want their wheat at the grain elevator, wherever it is, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, whatever it is. They don't want your wheat if you insist on charging an extra nickel because you think it's special. So you're a price taker, you have no market power. Please remember those terms, okay? You're going to hear me use those a lot. Conditions of entry. Now, I know wheat farming is not easy to get into, okay? So it's kind of hard to, identify an industry here that fits all these categories. We talk about them being competitive. So wheat farming involves a pretty large capital investment. However, on the global scale, if the United States wanted to purchase a wheat farm, we wouldn't even know it. It wouldn't be a blip on the scale. But in other situations, it's very true that the degree of competition corresponds to the ease with which firms can enter and exit that particular industry. So if you don't have to have a special license, special permit, a huge capital investment to go into a particular industry, and I keep using this example, so forgive me, but t-shirt printing, okay? You don't have to have a license to do that. Just get a direct-to-garment printer or screen printer, and you could go down to Padre Island on spring break and sell t-shirts. You can open your own business down on the beach, probably. In other words, there's no obstacles to entry and exit. Okay, that's another thing too. People can get in, but also you can get out. There's some, there's some, petroleum refining or recovery from the ground or what have you. That there's significant exit cost. You can't just walk away from oil wells. You got to clean up the mess you made and so forth. So if there's no obstacles to entry and exit, really. Okay, enough of that. Non-price competition. There's no non-price. When I say non-price competition, again, there's different metrics to compete on, but the idea here is price is the only thing people can compete on in a competitive industry. Wheat farming, again, I keep coming back to this. No one can claim that their wheat is special and so can compete on quality. Okay, quality is pretty much the same as standard. Here's some example. Financial markets, okay? I mean, the New York Stock Exchange, for instance. You follow any stock on the stock exchange, so forth, the price goes up and down. There's a degree of volatility that exists during the course of a day for any stock. It's because it's a competitive market. The whole world comes together to buy and sell stock on the NYSE. By the way, I understand the SEC is approved, Security Exchange Commission is approved for a new stock exchange to exist in Texas somewhere. I don't know if it's Austin or what have you. So people are getting out of New York. They want to go to Texas, and I don't know if they're going to call it the Tex or what, but the Texas Exchange, that's what I would call it, the Tex or whatever. But we're going to see a sea change, I predict anyway, in the next few years, because it's a lot easier to do business, in my opinion, in Texas than it is in high regulatory, high tax New York City. But the thing is, the whole world plugs into these financial markets. From our little town here, Claremore, we can buy and sell stock on the New York Stock Exchange, the NYMEX, the CBOE if you want to do options, Chicago Board Options Exchange. You can do a lot of this stuff from your living room or your bedroom. Agricultural products, a whole slew. I keep saying wheat, but corn, avocados, tomatoes, very competitive, okay? Heck, We got 1 acre right now, live in town, but we could grow tomatoes and sell them at the farmer's market, you know, okay? Or maybe get Walmart, the local Walmart, put them on the shelf. That's possible. Raw materials is another one, okay? Very competitive. You'll see these prices posted and adjusted on a minute-to-minute basis, perhaps. Copper, the price of tin and what have you. These are things that there's competitive markets for. I know there's significant entry barriers, if you will. It's not easy to get in and out of copper mining, but still there's enough of that going on around the world that the product is standard and there's a high degree of competition. So first off, we're going to kind of breeze through this. Your book talks about the other market structures first. But then I just want you to see here at the bottom of page, bottom of page 197, they start listing these things. And they describe this more, okay? They describe this more. And your price takers and so forth. All right. Now, I only have time to draw you a picture. But I want to draw you a picture that is not in your book. Not these two things together, but that we will, and I had hoped to spend some time on this today. The idea with perfect competition is, first off, you have a market. I'm just going to sketch this out. You have a market, MKT, and maybe this is wheat. Okay, let's say it's wheat. The wheat market. Of course, this is a supply curve and this is demand curve, unless it's a day I'm not thinking correctly. There is such a thing as a downward sloping backward bending supply curve, by the way. It can, for labor supply, can backward bend. But we might get to that, might not. But I digress. Okay, here's a market, price, quantity. All right. Now this is the market. It's not the individual wheat farmer. I want to draw what the individual wheat farmer really cares about over here to the side. This is the individual supplier. Now, here's the deal. They only care about maximizing profit. I want to put a little Q here instead of a big Q. This is the quantity of wheat they take to the market. So I'm going to use a little Q. Okay, so whatever's happening in the market over here will set a price that has to be accepted by the individual supplier. I drew a horizontal line over here that's called the D sub I, or individual demand curve. Okay, it's called the individual demand curve. What I'm saying is this: whatever's happening in the market sets a price, P if you will, that the individual supplier has to accept regardless of the quantity they bring to market. So this is called an individual demand curve. This is what the market will pay for every bushel of wheat the wheat farmer brings. Every bushel sells for the same price, and it's the price set by the market. Now, this is also an average revenue curve, and it's a marginal revenue curve. Average revenue and marginal revenue. So I kind of stack that here. Price and average revenue, we don't have time today, but if you had 1,000 bushels, you sell at $10. Let's just use some nice round numbers. Then the revenue would be $10,000, but you divide by the quantity, you still get $10. Okay? Still get the same. So the average revenue and the marginal revenue and so forth, these are the same. So you're going to read about that in your book. Okay, I'm going to draw just a couple more things here. I want to draw an average total cost curve in here. Remember, those are U-shaped, average total cost. And I want to draw an average variable cost curve. Remember, that's U-shaped too. It's below it. Remember this talking about those? And I want to draw a marginal cost curve. It goes through their minimum. So maybe it looks like this. And again, so there's three curves we've looked at before. and the one we're introducing in this chapter. And I'm out of time, but this picture is in your book. I would like for you to read about it, okay? And we'll do some measurements on it next time. Okay, sorry, I'm out of time. So read chapter 10, please.